Hello, welcome to episode 4 of African Diaspora Discussion. I'm your host, Yasmin. Today we're discussing the topic of the discrimination of Black youth within the educational system. I'm joined with a lovely panel, so if you could just introduce yourself before I explain the topic a little bit more, starting with Kel.
My name is Kel Shabazz, here in Cleveland, Ohio. I'm an ninth grade English teacher at Cleveland Central Catholic High School.
Thank you very much, and Trent.
Hi, my name is Trent Bailey. I am also based here in Cleveland, trained to be a high school social studies teacher, but I currently work for a nonprofit writing program.
Thank you very much. And Ashante.
Hello, I am based in Chicago. I just recently moved. I am based in Chicago. I am a digital earner and I am a Shopify store owner and builder.
Thank you very much. So today's topic was inspired by the idea of across the diaspora, Black youth are continuously disadvantaged due to the systems that are in place within the educational settings, such as over-punishment, stereotyping, labeling, self-fulfilling prophecies. This is all detrimental to Black youth in later life, as well as within the educational system. So to kind of get some background information and just start, could you please go around maybe and explain how your educational experience was pertaining to like how teachers and officials and the school board viewed yourself or people like you? And anyone can start.
I'll start. So I grew up in Cleveland Heights. I was in the Cleveland Heights school system, an inner suburb of Cleveland, Ohio. Cleveland Heights itself is, I'd say about 50% Black and 50% white with like a sizable Jewish population. And the school reflects that in elementary school, but after elementary school, a lot of white families take their kids out. You have a lot of educational white flight. So by the time you get to high school, it's more like 80% Black and 20% white. But growing up, so my teachers for the most part, they were either Black women or white women. I feel like I had maybe like in middle school and high school, at least like one white dude every year. In terms of Black men, I only had, I think, an art teacher and a music teacher. So and a gym teacher. So I never had a Black man for a course. They did go to my high school, but so Cleveland Heights, a few years ago, back in the early 2000s, got a grant from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And so they were given money and the school separated into small schools. And each school is supposed to focus on like their own little thing. So the one I was in called Renaissance focused sort of on like Socratic seminars and dialogues. And it was meant to be like you were discussing more in class. It's more of like a liberal arts focus. Well, unfortunately, Renaissance happened to have more of the AP and honors classes, and those shockingly were mostly white. So I'd say the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation failed because it just led to further self-segregation in our school. So even though I was in a majority Black school, I was often the only person of color in my classes, simply because the way that the gifted program tracking works from elementary school onwards is that they don't care about Black students as much, or Black students are more likely to be labeled as developmentally slowed rather than gifted. So with my teachers themselves, I don't think I never really felt called out. I occasionally had a few white women teachers who sometimes it seemed like I was the source of their ire. Now, I will admit, I was a very rambunctious youth. I talked a lot, I'm loud, I'm still loud. But even when I wasn't loud or doing things, I'd still sometimes be called out for behavior where like, that happened across the room. Like, how am I getting blamed for that? I had a kindergarten teacher who ripped up a drawing I made because I colored outside the lines. And she said that was unacceptable. And that seemed pretty uncool for kindergarten. And then I went to the University of Iowa for undergrad, and that is a very white institution. That's probably like 84% white. And then I would say either Asians or Latinos are the next highest group, and then like 2% Black. And up until that point, before going there, I didn't really identify myself as Black, just because going to a mostly Black institution all growing up, I was either told I talked too white by the Black kids, and the white kids were like, you're not white though. Let's be clear about that. But when I got to Iowa, there are so many students who had just like never interacted with Black people before that all of a sudden, like, I was seen as Black. I had a teacher who asked me about the Black experience, and I was just like, oh boy, wrong person to ask here. So I've rambled, but I don't know, my experience itself, I didn't necessarily go through a lot, but I witnessed it. I saw what was happening around me, and especially comparing Cleveland Heights with other schools. Like Cleveland Heights had a Black administration for the most part. There were white principals and whatnot, but it's diverse. But when you get out of Cleveland Heights and you look at other school systems, it's unfortunately kind of the opposite. You have in CMSD, Cleveland Metropolitan School District, you have Black administrators, but I mean, public education, 80% of teachers are white. So I know that my experience was not average for the average student of color, because the fact is most students of color are taught by teachers who don't understand where they come from, don't understand how they grew up, and it just leads to many consequences. So I'm gonna be quiet now.
Thank you for sharing. Ashante, how was your experience in regards to teachers or just the classroom environment for you?
Okay, so I have been predominantly advanced my whole life. So I was categorized, I was put in different classes compared to my other Black friends, because I moved a lot. Okay, I moved from Georgia to Chicago, then back to Georgia. So from Georgia to Chicago, I was in a predominantly Black area. I did not know what to do because I always went to predominantly white schools. Okay, so when I was put in that predicament, when I saw a group of Black people, I was like, hey, you know what? Black people, we need to stick together. So my experience in the Chicago system is that like a lot of the Black community in the school that I was hanging out with, because we all hang out in a circle, it's very segregated, Hispanics mixed with Hispanics, the whites, the Indians, etc. And then there's the Black people. I veered off into like the whites and the Indians and the Asians because I was so advanced, and that's what basically my class were. It was to the point where I was shamed upon. I was like, oh, she's being white, she's not Black, she doesn't know the struggle, she doesn't know what we go through. And it's not like I worked my hardest to get to that point, because I knew that if I can make it to a predominantly white class and being with other races other than Black, I know that I was making it. And that's sad, because it's just really wasn't a lot of Black influence in AP classes. And when the higher you get up the scale, the less Black people you encounter. I'm talking about my experience at North Paulding High School in Dallas, Georgia. I was the only Black girl in that year that took AP chemistry. It was only 5 of us that year. Okay, and I was that Black girl. So I had to stand up for the Black youth, and I had to pass that class. I had to pass that AP test because I had an obligation. I had to get that done so I can open that path for my Black followers. You know what I'm saying? And it was times where he was like, oh, he always asked me questions. It was only me. There's 4 other people in the classroom, and he targeted me to make sure I was on my toes, to make sure that I can earn his education, get to the point where he can be like, oh, okay, she's nothing to mess with. She actually knows what she's doing. Because I hopped from chemistry all the way to AP. There wasn't no honors. You know how that works when you're in the AP. Yeah, exactly. So I had to prove a lot, and I worked my butt off. I took AP psychology, AP bio. I took all those classes because my mom always told me that education is just something that no one can take away from you. No one can take away knowledge from you. And it's just sad because I feel like I left a lot of people behind that had a lot of potential, but they just wasn't given that chance. So a lot of my teachers was predominantly white. I had a Black engineer teacher. She was my engineer teacher. She had a degree in chemistry. She was my role model. She was my role model. The only Black teacher I ever had in my life. Very, 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 very smart. And I looked up to her because she told me, Ashante, you need to make it because you have a lot of potential. You are smart. And it just gave me hope because I just felt like me being in a predominantly white classes, my teacher really didn't believe in me, you know, and just having that Black figure, I wish there was more Black teachers out there.
Definitely.
So yeah.
I will definitely go into the topic of representation and lack of Black teachers, and especially lack of Black male teachers. And it's what you said in regards to trying to kind of somewhat having that responsibility to kind of make it and be that, you know, leader, so eventually other people can join and follow suit. Is, I think a lot of people have that kind of on their shoulders without even like realizing it, because everyone kind of needs to see someone making it before saying like, you know what, I can actually do that too. Thank you so much for sharing. And Cal, what was your experience?
Do you mind if I interject something just before Cal starts, just because Sean made me think of it? So most of my classes were predominantly white, but I was always terrible at languages. So I was always in like the remedial language classes. And so all my white friends were always in like the honor language classes, and they were always talking about like how difficult. But meanwhile, my language classes were always predominantly Black, and the teachers always like treated us like kindergartners, essentially. Like they like had essentially gave up on teaching us how to learn the language, and they're like, all right, we'll just do these base level activities because like I know you guys can't really do it. Like our final, like my friends in the honors classes had to like write papers, and we had to plan a trip to Paris using like a few French words. So that was like, I think a really interesting contrast, just to see expectations from teachers with white students and then expectations of white teachers with Black students. So you just made me think.
It's a certain, yeah, it's a shame that happens. And sometimes like the whole idea of teachers kind of having that like that label a child, for example, and if they have a preconceived notion that that child is intelligent or isn't intelligent, they will treat them accordingly rather than judging them for their own abilities and credentials. Cal, what's your experience before we move on to the questions?
Well, in Cleveland, I started out my school experience at NCMSD, which is the Cleveland Public School, and I failed out of there. Like I pretty much failed out of there. Like I failed the first grade, and I remember my first grade experience. You know, I had a white female teacher, and I just remember always being like considered the destruction or disruptive person in the classroom. And just I remember like constantly I'd come home every day, getting in trouble. I couldn't really focus in the classrooms. I do remember like the class like really being, for first grade, really large. So it was hard to really even do any of the work and just lagging behind on top of all the other stuff. So eventually I at the end of that, I pretty much failed. They were gonna hold me back. And so my mom decided to take me out of there, and she found this charter school. It was called Citizens Academy. And like they were willing, like, hey, look, we'll put you in the second grade. So from second grade to fifth grade, I was there. And being at Citizens Academy, eventually, once I got to the fourth grade was when they placed me in the special education classes. And I just remember my experiences overall. One, dealing with that, you being separated from all your peers who were in the general ed classes, and now you're like in these small special ed classes and having to go through that. But on top of that, I remember just dealing with the growing pains of being a young Black boy, and then people who are not Black themselves and are not Black men trying to understand and trying to deal with what is it that this young Black boy is going through. So I remember like just going through a lot of things and being chastised about a lot of things during that time. And then eventually, once I left out of Citizens Academy, my mother, she started putting me in Catholic schools, Catholic private schools. And I think like the reasoning for that was like not having that good experience in the public school, like in first grade. I think for her, she thought it would repeat again. And then two, I also think that, you know, due to the area that we lived in, like I think the closest public school was Collinwood High School at the time. And, you know, Collinwood High School didn't really have that great of a reputation as far as, you know, who's in the community, like who do we know? Like there's a lot of people I knew personally. And it was just that she felt I would end up being distracted or I would fall down like the wrong path due to like influences or whatnot. So I think that was like her main reason for keeping me out of a lot of public schools. And I noticed that a lot of Black family, you know, talk to a lot of Black older parents. That's their main reason that I see for wanting to take their children out. And then along with other, you know, reasonings, but like being in a private Catholic school, you know, usually when I tell people that, they're like, oh, you went to this, you know, real bougie, uppity stuff school, you wore this uniform, and it was a totally different experience from what I always thought it would be. The first Catholic school I went to was a school for all special education students, and I was only there for like maybe 2 years. Then the school closed. Then my 8th grade year, I just spent time at the St. Stanislaus High School, which is actually shared the same parking lot as the high school I went to, which is Cleveland Central Catholic, where I currently now teach at. And I remember being at Central Catholic and St. Stan's, and those schools are majority Black. I always tell people like none of the students that go there, none of them come from privileged background. Like a lot of those schools, you have like what's called vouchers. I guess they're kind of similar to scholarships or what have you, but like I think that kind of created the leeway for a lot of people who didn't come from, you know, a family background where they could just pay $8,000 for tuition. So that kind of like opened the door where a lot of students who come from different impoverished areas to be able to attend those schools. And so pretty much being at Central Catholic, you know, you still kind of felt like, okay, but I'm still back at home. I'm still with my peers. So being at Central Catholic kind of just gave me, as far as student wise, it gave me that ability to be able to identify with other students. Teacher wise, I never had a Black male teacher. And I think I've had a total of maybe 2 Black female teachers. And yeah, every teacher I ever had really was either, I think I had 1 white male teacher in 4th grade, and then all the rest of them were all white women. And I would say that out of all of them, maybe, I guess like in high school, the teachers that I had weren't too bad, but then like looking at it now, like studying like the education system and then looking back at the experience, be able to have like a real more broadened perspective, like you really do see like the thing that you missed out on, even being at, you know, like Catholic school, private schools, which are like, they have this label of being better educational wise than public schools or whatnot. And then just looking back at it, I'm starting to realize like there's a lot of stuff that even in those Catholic schools or private schools that you kind of didn't get taught, or you were misled about or misguided. You didn't really get that. You turned out you had that same experience that a lot of my friends who went to public schools had. But that was kind of like my experience. It wasn't like really bad or anything. But I guess like just being able to look at it and being able to see other people's experiences and hearing about them growing up, and then obviously once you get to college, when you have this enlightenment and you be able to look back at what you did go through it and kind of have that better understanding. And also being in the school now, especially like the private school, and seeing like a lot of the politics now. Like I didn't know this stuff as a student, but looking at a lot of the politics in some of these schools, like man, these Catholic schools do whatever they want. A lot of things that they do, like you could never ever get away with in the public school. And it's like damn, like this is what y'all doing. So it kind of like just having that experience now, it kind of like makes me understand what I didn't or what I did go through, you know, coming up, especially the special education system as well.
Yeah, it's true. I think from what everyone has said is that there's a sense of the teachers, for example, and having someone that looks like you. So we already kind of discussed it, but just to go into a little bit more detail, did anyone feel like having like the lack of Black male teachers, or the lack of Black teachers? I know, Shanti, you said you had one teacher who kind of was your role model. Do you think that having more Black teachers would have heightened your educational experience to be able to have a bit more positive? Or do you think that in a way it doesn't really matter how your teacher looks like? Does anyone have any ideas on that? Yeah, Shanti?
So that is true. I feel like if I went to a predominantly Black school, I felt like I would have been more comfortable with just the Black race in general, because just what I mean by that is that when you're in a predicament where you always go to predominantly white schools, you just see a lot of white people. You don't see no diversity, and it just becomes the norm. Hey, you know, when you see Black people, right, in your school, like, okay, they're Black, but why aren't they in the classes that I'm in? All my classes are predominantly white, and that's just the norm where I am from, and I didn't like that. So I just felt like if there was more Black teachers, and then I would have been like, hey, you know, I have someone to look up to. It is normal for a Black person to be as smart as me, you know? And then I always had white teachers, and then I had a Asian teacher. She was my chemistry teacher, and she was very smart. I'm talking about straight out of Harvard. And she's just very intelligent. And I looked up to her because first she was a minority, and second she was very, very smart. She actually compared me to the Hidden Figures. That's how, exactly. And I felt honored. And I was like, wow, you know, I'm so happy that you see that in me. And that's how, like, that was in Chicago. Okay, that was in Chicago. So that's when I moved back to Georgia to my predominantly white school. That's why when they saw my transcripts, they was like, oh, wow, like, I don't see you take honors. Well, I didn't have to take honors because I paid attention in class so much where I didn't, but it really shocked them. They was like, oh, so like, you know, do you really want to take AP chemistry? You know, there's other stuff you can take and stuff like that, trying to, you know, put me in that group. Well, I'm not that. So please put me in something higher so I can succeed to my goal. And when I got college offers, I was like, yes, you know, I was telling my friends, and my friends were just making fun of me, like, oh, so you're too smart, you're acting like you're white. I always had an AP chemistry book or an AP psychology book in my hand 24/7. And I just feel like, you know, people looked up to me, but I feel like I should be looking up to someone that is my color, you know.
That's interesting. I feel like with your situation and what your experience, what's interesting about it is somewhat like a discrimination in the other way around, because you were like educated and you were intelligent, and it was somewhat like the doubt that they had based on, like, I don't know, maybe preconceived notions. So it's interesting to see the other way around. Why do you think, or throwing this to anyone else, so what do you think is stopping Black youth for being like amongst like Ashanti and her, like back in school, like her peers, in the sense that why are less Black students kind of uplifted or kind of encouraged educationally to be in higher classes? In the UK, we have the same kind of system, it's called differently. But why do you think that there's a lack of Black students in the gifted programs and in the higher, higher classes in compared to the white peers?
Well, I'd say the main problem is they do tracking from such an early age. Like by the moment you enter elementary school, they already start a file on you and already have like preconceived notions. Or, you know, in elementary school, I feel like it's easy to kind of be like a gifted elementary schooler. Like it's like, oh boy, he did math in kindergarten, this kid's gonna be a genius. And then like 10 years later, you suck at math. And they're like, we were wrong about that. But I think, I don't know, I think because you have so many white teachers and admins who start that tracking, they just, I don't know, part of me thinks it's maybe just apathy on their part, or maybe just like self-fulfilling prophecy, setting them up for failure at an early age. They just don't think they'll be able to succeed. So they're like, why even bother? Heights was lucky enough that in a few of my honors classes, my science classes, I had Black students, which was nice. So I don't know. I often wonder this myself, because I think I probably would have come to my Black identity a lot sooner if I wasn't surrounded by so many white people in education. I mean, I don't know.
Do you think, like another talking point that I was saying earlier, do you think that the societal ideas of Black people in general trickle down into the educational system?
Oh, 100%. Yes, 1,000%.
Yeah, carry on.
I think for the most part, I don't know, Black people are either supposed to be either entertainers, athletes, or common laborers. That's the three categories we get. So if you're not good at sports and you don't show any aptitude for entertainment, well, in most of white America's mind, you're probably just going to be a janitor or something. Or if you really want to get down to it, most of white America is probably just going to think you're going to be on welfare. They're like, you don't even have a job.
Yeah, I was gonna say that, like, when you had that teacher expectation, like white teachers, they don't expect Black students to be anything or to do good at all, and it's a study that backs that up. Like I had the privilege of being able to do my actual research on, Black male students and their achievements in the classroom, and how it actually increases when they actually have, a Black male teacher that's teaching them, as compared to any white person teaching them. And studies have showed that, like, a lot of white teachers don't have high expectations for their Black students. And when you throw in the lower level education settings, like special education, being able to see that, a lot of schools get funding when they have more students being placed in special ed classes. I know in a lot of private schools, they give more donations to their schools when they have more students being in their special ed classes. And as a student who was in there at the time, I felt like in certain areas, like subjects like math or maybe science, it took a little more time to learn these things. But I started to see that being in English classes or social studies classes, I was pretty much advanced, and so a lot of my other peers. And you started to realize that, like, why are we in these classes? Like, why all of my subject classes, they're all special ed. And I remember a student whenever some of the special ed class students would go to the general ed class for things like music or gym or religion class, and they will make us read out loud. And a lot of the general ed kids were like so impressed, like, man, you can read. And I had a peer come to me and say, well, why are you in those classes? You know how to read. And then I remember telling that, it's like, well, we're not in those classes because we super slow or dumb or whatever. Like, we just take a longer time to maybe process things. But as I got older, I started to realize, a lot of my peers in these special ed classes, like, there's nothing special ed really about us or about them, and being able to see that, okay, there's majority all Black boys in this class. So doing more research in that on why there are so many Black boys in special ed classes, and you start to see that these white teachers can't deal with young Black boys at an early age. So when you have these young, rambunctious Black boys, and all they need is some type of either male figure or some type of teacher that has some type of understanding. But what these white teachers do is, since they don't want to deal with you, they can't handle you, too much for them. They think that, and as you get older as a Black boy, now you become scary. So it's like, well, how can we get rid of them? How can I get them out of this classroom? Well, we're going to put them in special ed. Like, you're going to tell the parents that, well, your child's been diagnosed with this cognitive disorder or whatever they want to call it. And then now you have this label the rest of your academic life that you are special ed. And what that does is they're pretty much telling you that you're average. That's all you're going to be. And don't have high expectations for yourself. Look at these test scores. You're not going to be the top of any class. You're not going to be able to get into, their ACT, SAT. Don't bother taking that. You're not going to pass that. You're not going to go to college. And I remember in my high school year, You know, I had a teacher try to talk me out of going to a university. He wanted me to go to a community college, even though I had a scholarship to go to a university. And her thing was, she thought that I would lag behind at a university. I didn't do well. I'll tell you right now, being in college was way easier than high school. And like undergrad and masters, you know what I'm saying? So it's like way easier than high school. So like to have that label on me that, oh, well, you just average or you're not going to do as well. I think that's a systematic design. I think there's a reason for that. It creates the pathway to, I know we'll get into it later, like the school to prison pipeline, because the psychology behind that, when you tell a Black student that they're average and they won't be anything in life, well, what do you expect for them to do? And what does that tell them that they should go do, since school is not their thing or place of being? So I think that's the reason why I think a lot of Black students are placed in those lower level classes. I think it's all by design. Like, it's a reasoning for it.
Yeah.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Mm-hmm.
And to add on to what Kel was saying, where do they place them, or where do they place us, people that are like that? And what's it called, those schools where you learn cosmetology, welding, stuff like that. They put us through a line so we can learn how to do day-to-day trades, so we can be the average citizen. Okay, even though you have the mindset to be a doctor, you have the mindset to be a lawyer, it's just to the point where they trickle you down that pipeline and that trail to put you into those classes so you can be an average worker and make probably what, $9 to maybe $20 if you're an expert at what you do. You know what I'm saying? Everybody is entitled to millions. Okay, everyone is. And that's something that I did not like, me seeing from the outside in, because I was in a different spectrum. And when I saw people like, hey, I'm going to go to cosmetology school or become a welder or learn a CNA to become a nurse or stuff like that, I'm like, hey, why don't you just go to university? Oh, it's because my grades, and they put me in these classes, and they keep telling me, oh, I have to go to remedial math. And I'm like, are you sure? Because I don't think that should be the path for you. They'd be like, oh, well, it's already done. I talked to my counselor. Your counselor is supposed to help you become better, get to your dreams and aspirations. So if you want to go to college, they should be helping you to go to college no matter what, and that's something that they didn't want me to take AP chemistry. They wanted me to take SAT and ACT prep to get into college. I was like, I don't need that because my PSAT is already high enough. So, when I do take my SAT and ACT, I didn't need it. I got a high enough score to go to college. Okay, so I just don't understand why, like, you're trying to push me away from those higher opportunities, you know?
It's very interesting that it's almost intentional, and it's almost as if they know what they're doing, and it's just like, it doesn't even have to be school to prison pipeline. It can be just school to kind of very like low skill jobs. And I think in a way there's nothing wrong with the low skill jobs, but as you said, if someone has an intentions to do more, be greater and do that college thing, the educational system should definitely not be holding back the youth to achieve those kind of things. I was just wondering also, Trent, do you have something to say?
I was just going to say, American students in general don't have a lot of agency, but students of color even less so. I mean, like higher education is not for everyone. Let's face it. Like, not everyone is meant to be in that. Not everyone likes school or scholarship. But like, give kids the choice. Let them try out and fail for themselves to see that they can't do it. I mean, one of the things Iowa has its problems, but like Iowa has like an 84% acceptance rate because when the school was founded, they thought that they didn't think that like tests or whatnot were necessarily representative of a student's ability to do well in college. They figure, well, why don't we let as many students as they want apply, and we'll allow the first year of college to separate those who want to stay and remain and those who can leave and decide school isn't for them. But instead we make it so selective and whatnot, and we put so much focus on testing. Testing has led to the further segregation of the American school system. I mean, the American education is now based on an algorithm, and they say that somehow it's the kids failing when really it's because the kids don't fit the parameters of the equation they've set, and they don't want to admit that they themselves are wrong, so they put the blame on the students. The failing education system should never be placed on students.
To add to that, another question, do you think the curriculum itself and what you are actually learning in school plays a role to the disengagement of students? For example, in the UK, Black history is taught very, very limitedly here. And to the point that when a Black student is sitting in class, it's very, very difficult to feel motivated when all you're literally told is your history started with slavery, and then full stop. That's literally the extent of our Black history. And then we're learning about the wars, we're learning about colonization, we're learning about the Holocaust, we're learning about everything in Western societies. But when it comes to the upliftment of Black people, it's very much slavery, full stop. So do you think that the curriculum itself also plays a role to the disengagement and just not kind of encouraging Black youth to be engaged in the classrooms?
I know in the research that I did during my student teaching, it kind of focused on, it can't just be a Black male teacher or a Black teacher, but it also has to be a Black teacher that is adding in that experience that the students can relate to. And I always said that the lessons that you teaching have to have some type of cultural element to it so that the students can understand and engage in it more. And that's kind of like my driving factor behind that, because when teachers are I found it as me as personally as a student, if the topic was something that's just not interesting to me at all, it's not really engaging, I fail at it because it's not sparking my brain. I have no interest in it. But we talking about social study, you start talking about, oh, this Black person did this, and this is how it affects what's going on now. Now you got some eyebrows being raised up. And I noticed that even with teaching, you can make mention, if you find a way to make that relate to students in their personal lives, they'll start talking more because it's something that, one, they got knowledge on and they can give you that feedback. And then they start slowly putting together those critical thinking skills. And they start to see for themselves that, man, I really do understand this topic in this class a little better now. I thought I didn't, but now that you put it like that, it makes all the more sense. For example, always Romeo and Juliet as an English teacher, I feel like Shakespeare is definitely driven down our throats, and for good reason. I understand why, but
don't you dare disparage Shakespeare.
but always, I remember telling a principal that you could take Romeo and Juliet and put it in Ebonics. Let's get away from the old English and put it in the slang that our students currently use right now. All right. And once you do that, now the students are oh, okay, I can understand it a lot more now. I understand the reading, I understand the storyline. And to a lot of students, once they get that down pat, Romeo and Juliet to them is love and hip hop. They're way more engaged in it, So I've always had that experience, especially when I get to college and you look back and it's man, they did not teach us none of this stuff at all. And then as a college student, you sitting in the classroom, whether it's a Black experience class, and you dang, I don't know who Marcus Garvey is. And professor telling me I'm supposed to know this in high school. I don't know who was the founding members of the Black Panther Party. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. All I know is Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King marched and he gave a speech, and then racism was over. And as a Black student, you kind of go into this world and you live in this social illusion. And the part of that goes on, the education system kind of enables that. It has you out there as a grown Black adult, and you got gaps and you're being miseducated. You have those who are uneducated, but then a lot of people who advance to that higher education, you find out that a lot of us are actually miseducated on a lot of things. And that's because the education system, they teach you what they want you to learn. They teach you that look, have this enough knowledge, this will help you get out to the world and work. but all the other stuff that, you know, that will actually help you grow, get you a broader perspective on a lot of things, understanding a lot of things, they're not going to teach you that.
I would say that my subject area, history and social studies, is the most whitewashed subject there is, and it's dangerous. It's a weapon. I mean, so Kel and I were in the same graduate program for education, and so we had to take classes where it was essentially like our subject matter. So all the English people had the same class, all the social studies, and I remember my social studies professor telling us that, like, you know, we were essentially teaching these kids to be like good American citizens and sort of like assimilating into American culture. And I'm just thinking, like, I don't want my students to assimilate into American culture. You have so many Black students in general, because I think whitewashing, I mean, it hurts Black students, but it also hurts everyone. That's the reason our country is so screwed up, because so many white people think their country has like never done anything wrong. Ah, yes, the most perfect government was started by slaveholders. And they thought, I remember we got in trouble with our mentor teachers because, you know, every day we started class, we co-taught an English and social studies class. And every day we started with like a journal entry that we'd discuss. And so we had one where we were talking about like Kaepernick and the protests. And, you know, we talked about how Francis Scott Key in the national anthem, he was a racist. There are verses about slavery. And the next day, our mentor teachers like pulled us aside, and we were told that we were teaching the kids to hate America, essentially. And it's just like, I found with history, because my politics are super leftist, and I know that if I say all that I want to say, people will complain. But you know, primary sources, history speaks for itself. There are plenty of people, like the Spanish were proud of the fact that they were killing, you know, Aztec women and children and wiping these people. These people documented the horrendous deeds they did. And I always found that my students we were talking about like the Industrial Revolution, because I don't know, modern world history from 1600s on effectively is Europe and white people messing everywhere up. They're just like, oh, you know, we fought ourselves for a long time in Europe. Now let's export that all over the globe. So you are learning about a lot of white people, but you know, the Industrial Revolution, who fueled those resources? I mean, yes, you have the miners in England, but all the colonial peoples providing that backbreaking labor, the blood, sweat, and tears that made these empires possible. I remember the Industrial Revolution. I'm always flabbergasted, I think, when people say history is boring or whatnot, because I'm just like, all fiction comes from history. Like, history is literally the story of everything. It should not be boring, but it's because so many teachers teach it as like, ooh, names and dates. They don't try to connect it. So when I conducted, like, my students are like, why do I have to care about the Industrial Revolution? I'm just like, because we still use child labor today. And it affects everything. Everything is connected, and kids kind of like, or they don't necessarily like, but I think the messy parts of history are interesting. I like to say that history is like morbidly fascinating, because there's so much horrible stuff that goes on. And it's not like that the horrible stuff is like, ooh, this is like really cool. You're just like, oh, wow, like this is fascinating. And I think the more you're upfront with students, the more they see, you know, history shouldn't be taught as names and dates. It's themes and recurring stories that intersect. So when you come up with a history curriculum where you show how everything is connected, you don't just talk about the famous white people that did that. If you're going to talk about, where's that dude? He's like the father of gynecology. They have a statue of him in New York. Like, yes, talk about that he's the father of gynecology, but also talk about how he experimented on Black women without using anesthetics and stuff like that. I mean, and yeah, we only talk about Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks when it comes to civil rights. Occasionally you get Malcolm X was angry about things, and white people didn't like him because he was too mean about racism. But we don't talk about Angela, we don't talk about Fred Hampton or Assata Shakur. We teach the bare minimum so that you will become a good patriot that's proud of your country, and you will always support it. You know, they always talk about that, like, criticizing your country is is hating your country, not loving your country. And I won't say I love America. I hate the American government. I hate what this country stands for, but I still love my country, like the people, some of the people who are in it, like the culture we have, the beauty we have. And I think we can only get to a better future if people actually learn what happens. If we keep lying to ourselves and never confronting our past, it's never going to get better. It's just year after year is propaganda after propaganda.
That's it. Yeah. Chanting yourself.
Yeah, that is so true because you guys have taught me a lot. I just graduated high school 2 years ago. Literally graduated high school. So me as a student, I didn't learn anything about Black history. My boyfriend's mom, we was having a discussion about Black history, and I was just telling her what the textbook's telling me. She was like, wow, you're Black and you don't know about your Black history? And a lot of predominantly Black schools do offer African American studies. My cousin has participated in that class in Florida, going to predominantly Black school. Me going to predominantly white schools, I didn't have that. So that's something that I missed out on, learning about my culture. And now I'm basing everything that I have learned. And that is true. It's slavery. Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, Malcolm X.
Obama.
Talk a lot about Malcolm X, how he's not being a great influence. I'm so sorry, my office. I'm not being a great influence, and how Martin Luther King was, self-actualized, and it's just, it affected me because I felt like I lost my Blackness. I just feel like I need to go into my history more and just learn who I am who I am, because school taught me who I am and what my ancestors have done, but there are a lot of things that my ancestors have done that actually changed America.
Yeah, and that's the sad thing about it, is the idea of discrimination doesn't even have to be active in a way of actively discriminating. It can be passive, and passive discrimination can look withholding truth, withholding information and knowledge about your history, about contributions of Black people to modern day society. And that's also a form of discrimination because, as you said, you go into your adult life and in a way, you don't, not that you're not proud, but you just don't know enough to kind of say, but we did this. So when you enter conversation, or even in the political realm, when they're kind of like saying why Black people are doing this and Black people are doing that, and always just having all these statistics and like negative stereotypes about Black people, is interesting because they never show the good. They never show what we have done and accomplished and achieved and what we have given to the world. So I definitely see the danger of not really giving that full knowledge of Black history.
Even the language we use. I mean, Kel, you pointed out a great point last year that I had never really embarrassingly thought of when you said the language of like slaves versus enslaved peoples. Yeah. Like, slavery relegates them to that single role. It's just like, a tool or property. It's like, there's so much more than that. Yeah. And MLK is a good point because we don't even get to learn real Martin Luther King. You just learn like, yes, non-violence, that's why the white folks liked him. But you don't learn that like after the Civil Rights Act that he continued Malcolm's work and he realized that like capitalism was the great enemy and he started going after that, the Poor People's Campaign. And I mean, the reason he was killed probably is because he started going after the Johnson administration in the Vietnam War, the military industrial complex. But we never get to learn about Radical King. We just get to learn about turn the other cheek King.
So intentional, and it's frustrating because in a way they see it all being played out. They know that they don't want to inspire the next generation of radical people. So like as you said, not only was Martin Luther King killed by like the US government, but hiding his radicalness like in his later life is intentional, not to inspire a revolution in essence. And does anyone have anything to add? I'll ask the next question.
I was just going to say, you see that with so many people. Literally all these figures you kind of learn about are so much more revolutionary. Even Helen Keller, we're taught that Helen Keller, miracle worker. She learned to communicate and we never hear from her again, but she becomes super active in like socialism and communism and the labor movement and everything. But we're like, no, we can't talk about that because the American education system is meant to uphold capitalism. That's everything it's meant to do. And every time you start to criticize capitalism, you're like, you can't do that. It's because America, capitalism, and racism are all intertwined. They can't survive without the other.
That is so true, because my mentor tells me this today. Sorry, last point. I'm sorry. My mentor tells me this all the time. Is public school, right? It teaches people how to be workers. It teaches people how to be regular, basic workers. Private school, you do have a little up, you know what I'm saying? It's private education. You get to learn just a little bit more, maybe to be a doctor or something like that. But homeschool, when you homeschool, you actually get to be filled with stuff that you want to know more. So like, for example, Black history, you'll be learning about Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks and etc., but you'll be learning about other figures in Black history as well, because you're not going off of the regular public school system and what they have tried to teach us. And a lot of people that are homeschooled are very successful businesswomen and businessmen because they are learning more and more about certain subjects than public school is.
Exactly. Yeah. So the last question, I always try to end the episodes with solution-based questions because often in the Black community, we have these kind of spaces where we're always talking about experiences and matter-of-fact things, but the beauty of it is that we can also try to get solutions and we can spread the solutions to other people, and hopefully that can infiltrate the educational system. So just going around, starting with Cal, what are solutions of making the educational system encourage, inspire Black youth and let them be less disadvantaged?
Well, I think that my first solution would be that if you're Black and you like really care about like the educational advancement of Black students, and you start studying that history, because you start seeing that, you know, historically within the Black community, being a teacher is not just some job or career, like it's a duty, because it's important to educate the generation behind you, because that generation behind you is going to be the future leaders. You know, they're going to be the intelligentsia of the masses. And, you know, you're dealing with white supremacy, you know, you're going to need those scholars, you know, those historians, those educators. If you don't have them, then, you know, where does that leave you at? And piggybacking on top of that, if you are a teacher coming into the education system, I always say you're going to be one or two things. You can either be a revolutionary teacher or you can be an oppressor, because at the end of the day, the education system is still a branch to white supremacy. You got a lot of Black teachers that are oppressors because they pass down the same misinformation, the same miseducation that a lot of the white teachers do in the curriculum. They go with the flow, and they have a lot of those same stereotypical expectations of their Black students as well. And if you come in as an oppressive teacher with that oppressive mindset, then you pretty much just continuing with the educational system is designed to do. And if you come in as a revolutionary minded teacher, I always feel like being a teacher is not going to be the end all be all of ending or the changing what's in the educational system. But as a teacher, you have some type of creative freedom and ability to implement something along the way. So it's like, I always hear like, well, teacher, well, I gotta teach this, I gotta teach that. But like, man, be creative. You could teach that, and you could teach what you want them to know and what you know they gotta know at the same time. So it's like, as an English teacher, like, okay, students gotta learn how to write essays and stuff like that, argumentative essays, da. And having that ability to pick and choose, okay, what book, make sure the book is on the grade level and all that stuff. All right, let me introduce this James Baldwin. slide that in. Let me introduce, this Toni Morrison book on the low, or any other Black author. Start and expose them to certain things, expose them to certain themes in the books, and having those discussions. Just like be creative. I feel like a lot of teachers just lack that. They just feel like I'm just going there and I'm doing whatever the curriculum say. And it's like, no, like add some creativeness in there. Like, it's like becoming a teacher is not the end all be all, because if you really want to change the educational system, I mean, it's going to take some dismantling, because again, it's a branch to something that's way higher up, and you ain't going to change that just because you got some Black faces in there. It's going to take a lot more than that. But at the same time, like, as a teacher, I feel like that's one of the few jobs where you can implement something. So like that's my solution at the time being.
Thank you very much. And Trent, what are your solutions to uplift Black youth?
Well, I'd say the American education system as a whole, I really can't think of anything besides burn it down and build something new, because I just don't think that the system will ever allow itself to be changed in any meaningful ways. That's why it's the system. But I would say, I don't know, I think if we get more involved in local levels, which is hard. People, we only talk about voting in the presidential election and occasionally like the midterms, and that's cool if that's your thing, I guess. But like, federal government only has so much, like, I don't know, we build it that the president has way more effect on your life than it actually does. But like your state politics, your local politics, those control your life. We need more people of color. Now, I want to say people of color, we need, because like Kel said, there are so many people of color who have just, been indoctrinated and they work for the machine. But we need people on school boards who understand these issues. We need, I don't know, first off, we need to get rid of public schools being funded by property taxes. That should be illegal, that's happening. I don't know how you increase the amount of Black teachers. I wish I had a solution for that, but I think that's going to come once you start changing things overall. But even if you had white teachers take some sort of like cultural literacy class, at least, and have some sort of idea of where their students are coming from, because ideally, yes, your teacher shouldn't have to look like you to be a good teacher, right? You should just be a good person and a good teacher. Because I'd say one of the best teachers I had, who inspired me to be a history teacher, his name's Matt Meister at Cleveland Heights. He's a white guy, but he came from like a really working class background. And he worked union jobs, and he was involved with his radical union, and he came from such like a place of empathy and radical politics. And we have so many teachers who come from such like bougie backgrounds. I will say, myself included, I come from bougie backgrounds, but so many white bougie backgrounds where they don't understand anything. We need more working class people in the education system for sure. And I don't know, it's a dream of mine to eventually start my own school. But if people just, I don't know, take back their communities. I was talking to my mom earlier about, how Biden got in trouble like last year for saying something about busing. And, he was right. Busing did not work. I mean, all it did was bring Black students to white schools. And then what did those white schools did? Oh, they just abandoned those schools and let the Black folks have that school district. Instead, they should have given Black people money and given them resources. But always our resources have to come as like crumbs. We just, I don't know, more agency. It's, there are so many problems and so many, I don't know. It's hard, but we just, I don't know. James Baldwin has a good quote where, I'm forced to be an optimist because, if you're not, then what's the point of going on?
It's definitely not like a one thing solution. It's definitely multifaceted. And Ashante?
From a student standpoint, because I'm still a student, Black students stand up, okay? make multicultural clubs. I was in one. Make a Black union. I was in one. I was actually the founder of one, and I was doing my thing. I talked to the school board. I talked to a lot of the teachers, the deans, and I was like, hey, you know, I think that we should do this, change that, especially in English, because we don't really read a lot of books. And I've done that in Chicago. And it got to the point where we read the book, The Raisin in the Sun, if I'm not mistaken. And that was a good book. And I loved that book. And that was a book about a Black family, you know, in Chicago. So, you know, that's something that we can relate to. Please stand up and learn about yourself, and dig deep into your history and know who you are, and don't lose who you are, especially going through, if you did what I did and was going to a predominantly white school, don't lose yourself into the system of being with a white predominant system of school system, you know. Just don't lose yourself. That's all I can say. Because don't be like me. Okay. I did lose myself to a certain extent where I had to just change and be like, hey, you know, other than losing myself to this system, how about change it? And then become teachers. If you want to, or if you want to be a teacher and you want to give back to your community, become a teacher. You know, there's not a lot of Black teachers out there. It's really not. And that's something I was looking into, becoming a teacher, but then I ended up being a digital currency earner. However, I do feel Black youth cups. Okay, I do still to this day. It might not be with educational purposes, but I do teach young youth to be entrepreneurs and stop having that mindset that you have to work a 9 to 5, because you don't. Okay, you can definitely find another way to be successful in life.
Thank you so much. So from the consensus from Cal, I'm hearing for the teachers to be creative, to inspire their teacher and their students. And even if they have a curriculum, you can wiggle some revolutionary items in there and just inspire them that way. Trends, I'm hearing cultural sensitivity. I think that's a big one, because realistically, we're not going to have like 50% Black teachers and 50% white teachers. It's always going to be a white predominantly industry. So even the white, because it's a misconception that kind of breaking down the system is a Black person's job, but it is very true that white people can educate themselves, learn cultural sensitivity. So when they are in a classroom with Black students, they know how to kind of connect and have that conversation with them and have that cultural sensitivity. So that's really, really good. And be proactive. That's what I'm hearing from Ashanti. Like create clubs and create spaces for yourself. You know, education system is somewhat a white space, but within that, you can definitely create space for yourself in society. Like in the UK, it's called societies and clubs, and just come together, collaborate, and try to uplift each other, kind of thing. So all of them, those are great solutions that I've heard. So thank you so much for being part of African Diaspora Discussions. I've learned a lot myself, because obviously I'm coming from the UK perspective, and learning the American system is very much the same in regards to the ills of the system, but obviously it has unique differences. But for the audiences at home, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and follow us on our social media handles, and watch out for another episode of African Diaspora Discussion. Thank you very much, guys, and I appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.